let's use this video for a bit of a discussion on paddling issues, paddling safety, solo kayaking, portable kayaking, and basically what I'm up to here. If you don't know me from before, my name is Patrick. I am a very active kayaker, both solo kayaking and paddling with others. I'm a kayak leader, and I do enjoy very much exploring different cities and locations like this. And this was a fall paddle back in 2023, just at the very edge of fall turning into winter. And I'll use this paddling trip for a bit of a discussion. You'll hear me both recording some notes now, a lot after the paddle, but also some safety notes and such that I recorded while paddling. So I'm in Karlstad, Sweden, and I've been paddling for a while. This was about a 25 kilometers trip, and I'm southeast, on the southeast part of the city, and I'm heading out to paddle on Lake Vänern for the first time. And if you're not familiar with Lake Vänern, and there's no reason why you would be if you live quite far away, it is relevant. It is a quite relevant lake because it's the largest lake in not only Sweden but the European Union. So heading out here in these cold water conditions, it's very important to be adequate in planning and taking into account what I'm getting into, because on a large lake like this, it can get really rowdy, just like it could at sea. If there's enough wind, the waves can pick up quite a bit, and they can build up a lot over a large lake like this. So, well, if you've paddled in these areas, you'll know this. And I had a similar experience on the second largest lake in Sweden, Vänern, on a different paddle where things got fairly crazy compared to what the weather forecast said anyway. But in this case, I've been checking out the weather forecast, which you should always do before a paddle, no matter how sunny or warm or calm it is when you start. Things could change in a matter of hours or in a matter of minutes even. So check the weather forecast for the entirety of your planned paddle with some extra hours to spare. And this is what, of course, I had been doing before heading up here. By the way, remember this buoy if you're going to check out the next video from this part, which will be about paddling in the dark, a safety video about paddling in the dark later on. So remember that buoy. But anyway, here I am paddling out towards the lake. It's a massive lake, so I'm already on the lake water, but it's a long way before I actually get anywhere near seeing more of the lake. So we have a fellow paddler in the UK, George the River Rat, who asked me on YouTube, I think it was, in a comment about, well, how could you resist those reeds that you paddled by earlier while I was paddling on the canals? And I do enjoy that. Here I finally got my money's worth during this trip, as we'll see in a moment. I do enjoy, for some reason, paddling through reeds. It's not something you would want to do if you live in an area that has alligators or crocodiles or dangerous animals, but we don't really have that in Sweden, that I've noticed anyway. But it is something that can provide a little bit of variety to the paddle, so I usually think this is fun. And I would be coming back here in the dark later, and I'll actually be paddling through these reeds again, because it's the shortest way, and by then it would be very relevant to have checked out this to know that there aren't obstacles and such. You wouldn't want to get stuck anywhere, and there was no real risk for that here. But anyway, heading out on a lake as large as this one, you obviously want to check your map before, and in this case the navigation is not that tricky for me. and I don't have a physical map because I don't live in this area and I don't paddle here often. So I was using my digital map on my phone, having downloaded Google Maps offline. But that's not something you want to rely on too much. You want to have the points in your head, and it's obviously better to have a physical map. But anyway, I'll be heading out now. I'm getting closer to seeing a little bit of more of the lake, even if there will be some islands blocking it. And I think in a few moments here there will be comments that I actually recorded during the paddle itself. So I'm now heading out on Lake Vänern for the first time. This is Sweden's largest lake. There are still these islands before I get a clear view. I'm obviously not going to go far out on the lake. It's a huge lake. Obviously waves could increase, and it's November. It's basically winter temperatures, and I'm solo paddling. It's getting closer to sunset, so I'm going to make one open passage here. It's still fairly calm and the wind prognosis is minimal. There's almost no wind. You can see that these waves could easily get a lot bigger if there was more wind. So I'm just going to peek at the vastness of the lake after I crossed that island over there, and then I'm gonna turn back towards Karlstad city and eventually take my train back to not back to Stockholm. Actually, I'm continuing to Oslo, Norway. So so far this is good to get out on some open water after I mostly paddled in small canals over there. When it comes to solo paddling, it's always a judgment call that really is necessary. For, well, many paddlers choose to never solo paddle for safety, going in a group, and that is actually the recommendation that I would give as well, unless you are experienced enough and have the knowledge and skills and equipment, preparedness and safety precautions in place so that you can make an assessment that what you are doing is safe enough. Like this passage here, for example. It's just a matter of kilometers, but even a few kilometers could become quite dangerous in these cold waters if something were to go wrong. So in really rough conditions, I wouldn't be making this passage, for example, by myself. If you're going with friends in a group, you have added safety. But in all cases, always rely on sound judgment, and that actually requires enough experience to be able to make those assessments. And if you're not sure whether you have the right amount of experience and whether your judgment is sound enough, then it's probably best to assume that maybe it isn't. If you're not sure about the conditions, if you're not sure that what you're thinking of attempting is safe, then assume it's not. In this case, in this particular kayak, with this really calm weather, with this forecast, with this distance at this location, I'm quite comfortable. But I wouldn't recommend it at all for paddlers without the proper background, and yeah, you see what I'm saying there. So just because I'm out here solo paddling doesn't mean that everybody should be out here solo paddling. And at the end of the day, as long as you're making an informed choice with safety as a key priority, and you prepare sufficiently and you're confident in your choice based on experience, that's a good way to go. Remember, things could always get worse suddenly, unexpectedly, and you have to be prepared for that. So anyway, this is really nice to be out on waters belonging to the huge lake Vänern, Sweden's largest lake. So it's an experience. I'm sure it should be interesting when I round the corner over there. But anyway, back to you in a minute. So yeah, as I was saying there, of course, if you go out in cold water conditions like this, if you go out on open water, if you go out in a bit of wind, or where there could be quite a bit of wind and waves, you definitely want to know what you're doing. So don't get into that if you're a beginner paddler or an intermediate paddler without experience in these conditions. But of course, solo kayaking can be enjoyed in safer conditions quite nicely, in a safe manner. But anyway, here I definitely had to take into account the weather. I wouldn't have been doing this if I had thought that there was a risk that things could get a lot choppier, because I would still feel a bit of chop on the way back, and I knew there was a risk that
Välkommen till Vänern. Welcome to Fox Island.
Fox Island. Well, there was obviously, even if I had some safety margin, there was obviously the season where it would get dark eventually, and
lots of foam here.
I definitely needed to have my safety margins in place here. And actually, all the safety margin I had was kind of eaten up by an incident later that we'll see here, where my inflatable kayak pump broke. And that's never happened to me ever before or since, which was ironic, because I just talked about things that you might not expect happening, etc. So you need to have those safety margins, and that's especially important when you are solo kayaking. So heading out
and
like
here
this,
it is, Lake Vänern.
Well, this is what it's all
There are
about.
still a few islands that you can see out there that are in front of the full lake distance, I believe. But the lake beyond those is just huge. I can't even see the end of the lake from here. So if you look between those islands, which is the kind of final refuge, I can't see the end of the lake. It's like you're out at sea, and yeah, I can see the horizon. I can't see land on the other side. But you know, as nice as it would be to paddle out to see the whole horizon just open up, I don't really have time for that. I need to get back before it gets dark, so I'm not going to paddle the whole distance here. But even so, having seen that enormous distance over the lake is something you don't see every day. I don't think it will be very visible on camera, but for me it's, let's just say it's very clear.
So yeah, I expect to return to this lake hopefully many times in the future, but I didn't have time here because of the season itself. It would be getting completely dark not too far after this, and it would have been a longer way to paddle if I went on the other side, the west side, seeing a bit more of the lake. But anyway, that was fun, and it's fun, you know, it's always kind of a milestone when you go on one of the big lakes like this. In this case, it's the largest lake in Sweden, and for that matter the European Union. And I've also paddled on the second and third largest lakes in Sweden. Here, by the way, it's cold conditions, and it's not always that graceful when you're in a dry suit and boots and whatever getting out of your kayak. I mean, my feet are protected by the dry suit there, but I'm trying not to get water into my boots if I can avoid it, which sometimes takes a little bit of finding the right spots.
So my pump just failed. That's the first time that has ever happened to me while paddling with an inflatable kayak. This just broke. So this is a matter of the pump just unscrewing itself. I'm gonna hope that this becomes sufficient. So my pump had unscrewed itself somehow. You know, appears to be easy to screw back on, but good to be aware of. I mean, in theory, I could have dropped that in the water, the other part. So I had a bit of a delay here, which is gonna cost me some of the remaining daylight. I was gonna pump some extra air into my air tubes because it's cold in the water, and I'm losing a little bit of pressure. I mean, no problem to paddle at all. I just wanted to up the pressure a bit, but my pump suddenly had unscrewed itself somehow, and it came loose, including the packing ring. Oh, and there's actually a boat on the water. So that is something that has never happened to me before, and also something to be aware of, that apparently it can happen. Alright, so now all the valves are pumped up.
So yeah, in this case it was a new kind of incident, a kayak pump breaking. When you paddle enough, you know that stuff happens, unexpected stuff happens. Your gear breaks down, you come across some sort of obstacle, or you get stuck somewhere in a way that you haven't seen before, or there's a boat that behaves in a bad way, or something happens that you didn't expect. And that might be things that happen rarely during your paddles, which means you're not really prepared for them, which means that the best thing to do is to always, when you go out, regardless if it's warm and sunny and you're in basic conditions that are quite easy, or in more difficult conditions like cold water conditions here, even if the weather is quite good, you always have base layers of safety that are appropriate for where you paddle. So you always have your PFD and you always have your paddling safety gear. And in this case, like I have, I know I'm going to paddle in the dark for a bit, even if I had expected more of it to be actually in the city. So I have my lights along, a 360-degree light on the kayak, and a kayak on my a light on my PFD as well, not just on the kayak. And because my body is blocking the light that's behind me, so I have a light actually on my PFD that can be seen to the sides and to the front at least. And I have a headlight if I need it, and I have backups for some of these items and extra batteries, because in cold conditions, in the dark, stuff sometimes doesn't work. Gear doesn't always work. And redundancy is a great keyword, quite simply. None of this is supposed to sound negative or overly complicated and such. It's really about, if you have the right gear, if you're prepared, and you've thought about and planned for different scenarios and how you would handle them, it is so much easier to handle situations once things go wrong and problematic situations arise. Another thing that might be worth mentioning, because this is cold water kayaking, is that on this particular kayak, the combing is a little bit tricky, so I find it a little bit tricky to actually put the spray skirt on in cold conditions, especially when it's a bit stiffer. So I do that without my gloves, and as such you can hear me blowing on my hands there to warm them up. So in cold conditions, having different strategies and backup gloves and perhaps a thermos of warm water to fill them up with, or at least to warm your hands, or hand warmers, all of that stuff can be really key, because you can be quite miserable in cold conditions if you don't take care of your hands, your head, and so on.
So I'm behind schedule now. Remember how I was just talking about how things could unexpectedly happen? So that has never happened to me before. I had my pump actually apparently having become unscrewed from maybe rotating during transport or whatever, but in all cases the parts actually came apart, and fortunate that the packing ring actually landed in my kayak when it did, so the pump still functioned after putting it together. Very, very interesting. I decided to top up the pressure a bit on my kayak with the cold water and whatnot to make sure that I'm at full pressure, and as such I thought I would save some time getting back, and of course I'll have a much better paddling situation now with full pressure for a while at least. But even so, I did lose a bit of time, so I would say I probably might have been just as well off not pumping anything up at all. But that was a good experience anyway. To be noted, check your pump before heading out. I did actually note that there was some sort of issue with it while pumping up the kayak, but as I did you know, I was able to inflate it, so I kind of rushed to get out on the water and have as much time as possible on the water. Lesson to self: always try and figure out what the issue might be, even though at the time I couldn't really see what the problem was. Now obviously I know that the issue was because the pump wasn't really screwed together correctly anymore. So yeah, that's interesting. What's gonna happen now is basically that I'll have much less light for the rest of my paddle. It's basically sunset right about now, I would say, or very soon. So in half an hour or so, I would say things are gonna be quite dark here. By now I have my lights on, omnidirectional lights on the kayak, so I'm visible towards boats, because actually that's became particularly relevant here, as I haven't seen many boats at all today, but there were a few motorboats, and by now in this light I really need to be visible, so now I am. And the light, however, is not that much of an issue. It's still, as I said before, calm conditions. I mean, you have a little bit of chop out here, but the wind is minimal, and I'm basically just heading back to the mainland, which is up by that mast that's blinking over there. And it's some kilometers to paddle, but in the end, by the time I get into land, I'll be fully equipped with lights and so on in the dark, and the remaining part there is only going to be canal paddling to get back to the starting point. Basically, I'm trying to circle around to see as much as possible of the city. Yeah, so I now paddle 18 kilometers, and I have about 10 to go, and I was kind of counting on a possible hour in the dark. I mean, I have some margin here, because in all cases, you know, otherwise I'll just be sitting close to this train station with nothing to do. By the way, there's a boat out there with no lanterns, no light.